Hey, Endurance Company athletes, this is Joe and Carrie coming at you. Our goal tonight is to talk about the open water swim anxiety that a lot of us faced at TriShark. I believe that it's a really common thing, and I think for most of us triathletes, the swim start is probably one of the most stressful things about doing a triathlon. So what we're going to do, Carrie is, I'll let her tell a little bit about herself, but I'm going to play the role of an athlete and be authentic in my experience with open water swim starts and stuff I've had to deal with. And she's going to play more the role of the counselor, therapist, expert, and talk to me about ways of dealing with that. So that's kind of what we're going to do. And in the middle of that, we're also going to be trying to help you guys get some tools or learn some tools on how to get ready for an open water swim.
I guess too, if you have questions or comments afterwards, feel free to reach out to us because we're here to help.
Cool. So if I was somebody coming in to get help, what would you do first? Like, so play the role of counselor.
Okay.
Because she is a counselor. So.
Well, I guess I'd start with, tell me about what your experiences have been.
Well, the first time I did a triathlon, I had no idea the swim. I mean, I just went in nervous about my first triathlon. I didn't think about the swim being a big deal. It was TriShark 2001, and the water was kind of cold, but I didn't think much of it. I had a wetsuit, and I was just excited to race. And so I didn't even think about the swim being a scary thing. I was just more nervous about any kind of race happening. So I'd done one triathlon before and it went fine, so the swim was okay. We all lined up on the beach, and then the gun went off and we jumped in the water, and maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds into the race, I noticed that I was getting tighter and tighter in my chest. Mm-hmm. And at some point I couldn't breathe anymore. Mm-hmm. And that, along with all the bodies splashing around me, and knowing that I was trying to be competitive in the race, I just couldn't breathe. So I had to flip over onto my back and kind of like lay there and stare at the sky. And that was the only thing that brought me peace, as I looked at the clouds in the sky and just sort of imagined that I was just laying by myself looking at the sky. Mm-hmm. And it felt like it was 10 minutes. Like I felt like I was out there forever, and the race was getting away from me. And at one point I didn't even think I was going to be able to flip back over and continue swimming. I thought someone was going to have to pull me out of the water. But eventually, and it might have only been 30 or 40 seconds, I was able to begin to swim, and it was great. I swam strong the rest of the swim, and I had a fine bike and run, and that was that. But the point was, like, that happened, and it freaked me out so much that, and I didn't know what caused it. I think that was the biggest thing. Like, I didn't know why it happened. And every race after that, for a long time, I was very scared or very nervous, fearful of having that happen again. Mm-hmm. That happened. That then extended through the majority of the 2000s, so into my professional career, and finally I was able to keep it under control in the mid to late 2000s, but it took a long time.
So there was significant anxiety as a result of that one event. Was there anxiety when it was actually occurring?
Well, define anxiety. What does that mean?
Fear, a feeling of panic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, during it, not leading up to it, but as soon as it happened, it was I was very scared.
So you felt the sensation first, and then the panic set in.
Yes. So the first time, that's what happened. The first time it was sort of like before you know something's hot, you just you do something and you don't realize it'll hurt you. And then after that, you are very cautious when you go near it. So the next time I was approaching an open water swim, I was incredibly nervous about that happening. Mm-hmm. So time number one wasn't even on my mind. Once it happened, I was scared. Time number two, I had anxiety and a lot of fear leading up to the start of the race. Mm-hmm. And that brought about it also.
And it happened again?
Oh, it happened many times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
yeah. It didn't just happen once. It happened many times, and I was able to control it a little bit better, but it still happened. And being a competitive athlete and knowing I needed to stay in the front group, that didn't help the anxiety go away, because you need to have like anxiety about, or well, good anxiety about that, like a competitive anxiety or competitive juice for that. But knowing that I needed to be with the group and I was scared I was going to hyperventilate, the two of those things together was a bad combination.
And then the race is getting away from you while you're panicking, and you feel helpless and out of control of your race. And when did that stop on its own?
No. Starting maybe a week or two leading up to any race I did, I began to be worried about how I was going to handle the swim. Am I going to hyperventilate? That was my biggest fear. I would study the swim start, and beach starts were the worst because you ran into the water and already your heart rate's up, and that exacerbated it. But it was a big deal. Like I was way less nervous about the details of the race as I was about the fear of the first 2 minutes of the swim. And I knew if I could get through the first 2 minutes, it would be okay.
So really, after you got through those first 2 minutes, then you knew you were fine and you could go on, and you didn't even worry about that feeling coming up again.
Yeah, totally. Yep, and I could even go hard. I could go hard and almost blow up. Like I could then, once I was comfortable, I could bridge over to a group and almost blow up in the water, and you get that, you're working hard, and then slow the stroke down and recover while still swimming. And I could do that at will, but not at the beginning of the race.
Interesting. And did you warm up for these races?
Yeah. So that was one strategy, is I started to do as long as I could do a warm up. And it started with, I call it making peace with the water. So I'd get into the water and I would just like feel the water on my body. And sometimes that was enough to set up a tight chest. But all I had to do is all I'm doing is standing in the water, and I would dunk my head underwater and put my head up above the water, and normally that was good, but sometimes that also caused constriction up here. And then I would swim nice and easy and get relaxed, and it'd kind of come and go. Like the tightness would come and then it would go, and there was a couple times where I was waiting to start the race. They had called us up and our wave was there, and I got so tight in my chest that I knew if they blew the gun, I would just have to stand there.
Okay.
Yeah. But fortunately that passed, and I never had to stand there at the start of a race, but it was still there. I mean, so that happened in 2001 the first time, and then I did a lot of sprint and half and Olympic tries in 2002, and then in 2003 I did the first Ironman, and that was when it was still a big deal. 2003, 2004, 2005, the biggest stressor of my career was that.
Right. So when you looked at many years of your competition, your biggest obstacle was getting through the first 2 minutes of the race, and you really felt like you could fail at that point and at that moment.
Oh yeah.
So we do have strategies to talk about, but I also know that you've overcome that. And can you talk about how you've overcome that?
All right, so I did all kinds of stuff. I read about it, but at the same time, I was also deeply vested in reading about like Zen Buddhism, and I was into meditation. So I was trying to incorporate those strategies into how I approached a race, which kind of worked, but I actually saw somebody.
Okay.
I went and saw a lady who was working with people like with anxiety, and she asked me a lot of the same questions and had me talk through how it happened and how I felt. And then I think she gave me some breathing exercises to do. And then she also had me do some tapping, which made absolutely no sense to me at the time. But there was some tapping here and maybe some other places, I don't remember. And I actually tried that at some of the races very subtly because I felt like a goofball doing it. So I'd be like warming up, and I'd be standing out there and looking around and like tapping myself, hoping nobody was watching. And I think that might have helped. But ultimately what truly got me over it was understanding, well, first off, I think stopping racing as a professional was a help, because I was always very scared of the swim. I needed to have a strong swim to be in contention, part one. And number two, to have a strong swim, you had to go out really hard, because in the mid-2000s, and probably still today, the pro men went out like it was a sprint triathlon. I mean, it was just like a all out to the first buoy. So the first 200 meters was like flat out. And I could never keep up. I mean, and if I tried to keep up, I'd probably hyperventilate, right? Or so I thought. So I had anxiety about getting dropped, even if I was swimming well, in addition to not being able to go too hard because I was afraid I'd get, hyperventilation. So I think stopping the pro racing was one good thing. And somehow, like when I transitioned back into age group racing, I had more confidence being in an age group race. However, it's really not much different. I mean, you still go hard at the start. But I think the mindset of not racing all out from the gun, well, at least against pros, that was part of it. A second part of it was when you raced as a pro, you started first, and in the Ironman races, they would do a couple of different things in the 2000s. They would either put the pros in the center and have the age groupers right behind him, and you'd all start at the same time, and that was just not a place I would ever want to be. Sometimes they'd put us about 200 meters out into the water and have the age groupers here, and we'd all start at the same time. And sometimes they just have us start and all the age groupers would watch. So no matter what, I felt like I was being watched. So I felt like I was being watched. I felt like I needed to go super hard to stay in the group, and I was afraid if I went super hard, I was going to get tight in the chest and have hyperventilation. So all those things were just like a perfect storm for never ever feeling comfortable at the beginning of a swim.
Yes.
So the age group swims were a little different because even though I was still in the first wave, the waves were smaller, and for some reason I was more confident going into those. But it still happened. So I stopped racing pro in 2007, and I still had to use a lot of strategies in 2008 and 2009 to overcome that. It never happened again, but it wasn't because it was gone. It was because I was suppressing or doing something to.
No, so we'll talk about why tapping works, but what I'm hearing you say, and I think what a lot of athletes do, is in the first 2 to 3 minutes of the race, they put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves. I'm either going to make it or break it. This is going to dictate the rest of my race. I'm either going to keep up or I'm going to be dropped. If swimming is your weak point, then that puts even more pressure on you to try to keep up, overcompensate. And that alone can cause shortness of breath on land, not to mention in the water when your breathing is restricted.
Yeah, true.
And I don't know if this is correct or not, but when you talk about when you were age group racing, the feelings weren't as strong but still present. You're not being watched as much. Everybody else out there, there's some weaker swimmers than you. You don't have to bust it out because you can catch them on the bike and the run. That swim is just a start position. And so putting it in context and putting that swim in perspective, especially the first 2 minutes, might have been helpful to you during that time.
Yeah, all that probably was playing a role. Yeah. What I intentionally did was I looked at where am I most comfortable swimming. And whenever I give a swim clinic, I talk about this, but now it's in the context of reducing anxiety. But I know that I always breathe on the right side, and especially at the start of a swim, I don't like to see people in my face when I'm beginning a swim. I still don't like to see people in my face when I begin a swim. So because I breathe on the right, I always start on the far right side of the allotted area. Secondly, I tend to pull to the left naturally. So I know that if I just swim hard or swim well, I'm going to end up drifting back into the center. So I was using a combination of where am I most comfortable and how am I, like, what do I do when I perform? And using those two things in a combination of figuring out, okay, can I optimize my natural tendency to pull to the left and my desire to not see people when I breathe? And fortunately for me, that was perfect on the right side. So front row, right side was where I always started, always. And so once I got that position, I was very comfortable because I knew I could go out hard or go out and I could normally breathe to the right and I wouldn't see anybody, nobody's face or feet would be in my face. The second thing I learned to do was pace myself at the beginning. So again, if I give a swim clinic, I would talk about it in terms of swim performance, but this is in terms of anxiety reduction. We're so ramped up or so amped up before the beginning of a race, and the environment doesn't help to allow you to be calm. They have rock and roll music playing, the speaker, the guy is getting you all amped up. Everybody around you is getting all psyched up, and it's really funny if it's a half or full Ironman because you're basically getting psyched up to go swim for an hour, which is just start slow. So you're already amped up, right? And so if you go out hard, you got to imagine that you're performing way beyond where you should be performing.
Right.
So if you go out comfortably, you're still probably swimming faster than you'd normally swim in a pool. So I almost guarantee you that given the adrenaline and given the excitement of a pre-race, if you just swim 100 in the pool steady, you're going to be like 5 seconds faster than you'd normally swim any other day.
Right.
So knowing that, I knew that if I just started controlled and steady, it would still be really fast. And if I felt like I was swimming fast, I was swimming way too fast. So I already had it in my head, all right, slow, methodical strokes, and you'll still be fine. And I learned that because one time I literally had to start slow because I'm like, I'm just gonna try starting slow because I just don't wanna hyperventilate. And I started nice and slow, and like, I don't know, 20 or 30 strokes into the race, I look up and I'm like in the lead pack. And I'm like, this is the first time I've been in the lead pack. And so I'm like, there's something to this, swimming slow and steady.
Yeah.
So that was a good experience.
And relaxed.
And relaxed, yeah. And then the other thing was exhaling fully was really critical for me.
Yeah.
So and I think this is true even when you give a speech or when you're nervous, you don't exhale all the way before you breathe in, and then before you know it, you're about out of air, and you're out of air, and there's nowhere else to breathe, and you have to, like if you're giving a speech or if you're a public and doing something, you have to kind of cough and talk, and if you're giving a speech, it's kind of embarrassing because people know you're flustered, but you can't do that in the water. And so one thing I really focused on was a strong, long exhale right at the beginning. So I'd start with a, and then I would almost do a side stroke and take a really good, clean, deep breath of air, and then exhale really forcefully and really hard, and then side stroke again, a big breath of air. And after 3 or 4 of those, I got into that my lungs were expanding and contracting just perfectly, instead of expanding and not contracting and then doing this, and then you have no more residual in there. So all those things, so position, starting steady, and full exhale were critical to, that's like kind of the magic formula.
Yep.
It doesn't mean it always works. Like there are still times where maybe 30 seconds into the swim, I'll start to get a little bit of that, like, oh boy, there I'm getting a little tight. Long exhale and maybe a longer moment on the side almost always cures it.
Yeah. No, you're hitting a lot of the points that I was going to talk about,
Okay,
which
cool.
is awesome because you're doing it. And I wanted to hear your experience with those techniques. In addition to that, when you talk about practicing, one of the best things that people can do is practice the worst case scenario. If you get into a pool with a group of people and you all start swimming and you're all swimming over each other, you realize pretty quickly you can get out from underneath. You're not going to drown. And so then you can take that experience with you when you go to one of these mass starts, and you can realize even if the worst happens, even if my goggles fall off, even if I get punched in the face, it can still be kind of a game. It can be fun. I'll be okay. So that's another. But when you went through the things that helped you, when you talked specifically about tapping, it is a technique for reducing anxiety. And what I'm hearing is a lot of swimmers are on the verge of panic attacks in the water, and so if you can treat it like, okay, let's practice this. Let's find some strategies so that this won't happen, or that we can work through them and reduce all that anxiety, you'll be fine. When she had you tap, what she was really doing was, when you're anxious, you've got a lot of signals going to one part of the brain. And when you start tapping at certain known places on the body, it resends, it sends those signals elsewhere. And so some people it works, some people it doesn't. The hands, did she have you tap your hands?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember,
Uh-huh.
but I remember there was a lot of tapping.
There's here, and then the hands.
Okay.
And some people it works. I would say practice it. Some people may feel very self-conscious. And the other thing it might be doing is it might be setting people up for anxiety unknowingly because they're
If
thinking,
you're tapping.
yeah, if I'm doing this. One of the best things that people can do when they're experiencing anxiety, and you hit it right on the head, it's that breathing. And it's especially important when you're swimming. When you breathe, if you start getting nervous, your breaths shorten up and you start taking really short breaths, just exactly like you said, and it increases that arousal. It increases that anxious feeling. So really, from the start, and I've actually seen you do this, I'm surprised you didn't say it, from the start of the swim, you're totally in your head. It's deep breaths through the nose, exhale through the mouth. You can even count to 5. If you're feeling like that isn't working, and you should be practicing this ahead of time too, I'm going to add that note. You can place your hand between your belly button and your rib cage and feel your stomach go in and out. In the water, it is sometimes soothing for people to hum through their exhales.
Yeah,
Have you done that?
I have actually done that, yeah.
It's just another sense that you're picking up and you're overriding that anxious feeling.
Yeah.
So that's another good thing. Talk to yourself. Mantras are extremely effective in helping people reduce anxiety. And so I've heard people, when it comes to swimming, talk about the little dory fish.
Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. And then they can actually visualize the dory fish. Things seem to calm down a little bit, and that's where they go with that. Let's see. Keep your mind in the present. That's another good thing. A lot of times when we're thinking about what could happen, we're back in the past because you're remembering that situation where you took off and you had to flip over at your first shark race. And that situation, that past situation, was creating tremendous anxiety for you for years. If you can keep yourself in the present and acknowledge the fact that, yes, I am wrestling with anxiety, but I'm doing things to reduce my anxiety. For example, to pull yourself to the present, you can acknowledge 5 senses, 5 things with each sense. So sight, sound, taste, hearing, and touch. I had to look down at my notes to remember the 5 things. But one of the ways that we pull ourselves back, it's a mindful technique. And it's really by not only acknowledging those things, but appreciating it. And what better place to do that than at the start of a race? And so you can look around, find 5 things that you see. Notice the smells that you're smelling. They may not be good at the beginning of a race. Feel the sensation of the water. Feel the sensation of what your wetsuit feels like. Acknowledge those things. Really work hard and spend time focusing on that present moment. And that should also help.
Along with that, I think focusing on the present is helpful because not only would the past experiences lead to current anxiety, but the stress of, oh man, a poor swim and I'm out of the race.
Great point.
So not necessarily true, but that was also a contributor because oh man, if I don't do well in this swim, I'm not going to place well.
Well, that's exactly, and that's one of the things. Stop the what ifs. What if this happens? I'm not going to succeed. Yeah. What if I fail? Oh, no. Let's turn use that what if as a signal to, I need a strength-based thought. And have that strength-based thought ready. And so when you hear yourself saying, what if, think, I'm going to nail this swim. I'm going to swim strong. I'm going to breathe deep. I'm going to relax through my swim. I'm gonna acknowledge that it's cold and that I'm anxious, but I'm gonna do this. Everything related to the present moment and everything that's strong about the fact that you're a triathlete in a pro race or in an age group race, wherever you may be, you're taking on an event where strength is it's the absolute, it's what you need, and you have it. You're there. You've done the practice. Another thing that you can do that's a little bit more, it would take some time to set up, is progressive relaxation. This would be, you go and warm up so you'd know what it felt like. You'd get yourself alone and on your mind, to yourself, focusing on the present. You could start with your toes or you could start with your neck. You basically tense a muscle group and then relax it. And you work your way either up the body or down the body. And when you do that, you're going to spend a few seconds holding it, and then you're going to feel what that relaxation feels like when you let that go. We're focusing on the present, and we're actually relaxing our body, setting ourselves up for a relaxing, strong swim. Okay? And the final thing, and the thought that I had, is so oftentimes athletes are hitting the caffeine super duper hard before the swim. And if we are really struggling with the jitters and the caffeine is setting up that anxiety, why don't we hold off until we get to the bike? You've got your gels on your bike. A lot of those gels have caffeine. You've got your caffeine tabs if you need them. Let's not use that caffeine if this is a problem that you're really wrestling with, and maybe some of these other techniques haven't worked.
Yeah.
Until we hit the bike.
I did do that too. I used to take coffee every morning, and then for a while I took a 5-hour energy about 30 minutes before the swim, and that wasn't so good. So then what I ended up doing was I took the 5-hour energy right before the swim started, because it would take a little while to kick in. Probably still not a good idea, but,
right.
Still alive.
Right. But those techniques, do they, you'd have to practice them ahead of time?
I think practicing ahead of time is a big deal. So even whenever I had the opportunity to swim open water, I would go swim open water and imagine the start of a race. And at the very beginning, just when I stood in the open water and imagined the race, I would start to feel the tightness begin in the chest. It was a brilliant opportunity to practice that.
Yes.
And then just plop in the water. And then I often went back to the thought, like every time I go to the pool, I never hyperventilate at the beginning of a swim. And most of the time that I go to a lake and swim with buddies, I never have anxiety. Yeah. So why is it that the race causes it? And for me, that was a comforting thing. It's like, this race shouldn't be any different.
Yeah.
And that worked for me. Now, some people would say, that's why, because it's a race, right? But for me, it worked the other way. So I thought back to all the times that I enjoyed playing in lakes. Like, I love the water. So, and typically lakes for me are recreation and play. So if I could go back to, like, I love playing in the water. I've loved playing in the water since I've been a little kid. I get to play in the water.
Yes.
And that helped a lot too.
Yes. Remembering those fun memories.
But it's a whole process. So when I was racing frequently, I had a timetable. I would do a run warm up, then I'd rack my bike, do a run warm up, and then go take the bike for a quick spin, and then go down to the water. And I'd either get the wetsuit on or get my gear on, and I would spend as much time in the water as I could. And I tried to time it so when the swim warm-up opened, I could be in the water, and I could just be there. Like, I could swim as much as I wanted. Because, if the swim was 1,500 meters or 1,900 meters, I could swim a couple hundred meters, and that would not affect my performance. In fact, it would help my performance. So a long warm-up was good. Another thing that it didn't really suit me well, because I was almost always in the first wave, but when I wasn't in the first wave, I would look at the spot that I wanted to start. And okay, I'm going to start on the front row right side, and I would watch one or two swimmers that are starting where I want to start. And then I would see how the dynamics of the group affected those swimmers.
Yeah.
So I could begin to visualize, okay, if that's me, here's what potentially could happen. Like, maybe one guy would swim off course. Well, be sure not to swim that direction. Or maybe one guy kept swimming straight and the rest of the group kind of formed over here. Well, put that in the back of your head that maybe the group's going to form over to your left. So be aware that you do want to gradually merge to the left. So watching someone else do it helped me visualize my own swim, but also it helped me see other people do it.
Yeah.
So when you don't go first and you see somebody else do it and they don't fail, they do it.
Yeah.
It's okay, well,
yeah,
I'm going to do it too, and it's no big deal, right?
Yeah.
But when you're first and you're the first group to go, sometimes it's a little bit more nerve-wracking.
But there too is a pretty good case for the what ifs.
Right. Good point.
You really got to stop those what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started first in swims too, and one of the things that I do is I find a swimmer who's going to swim just a little bit faster than me, and then I focus on their bubbles the whole entire time.
Yeah.
And so if you can bring yourself to the present, and if you can, focus your mind on something that's going to help your race, and not, they call it catastrophizing, Did I I think I said that right.
Catastrophe.
Yeah, don't go don't go there, you know. This is all about strength, and the breathing, you know, warming up may help some people it may not.
Right, it may not be good.
Yeah.
And if it's super cold outside, maybe the warm up, you get out of the water and you start to shiver, that's not a good thing. So it kind of depending on the weather, sometimes I wouldn't do a warm up, or they wouldn't allow warm up, and then I just needed to visualize. But what I did try to do was sneak down to the water and at least put my face in the water. Because for me, just tasting the water and getting my face submerged and kind of blowing some bubbles and getting that feel of water in my mouth and maybe even a little bit up my nose, that was a good thing.
Right. And I would say too that it is a natural response when you hit really cold weather to take those shallow, deep breaths. And even I have had to work to really relax during that point. But the point is, you can create a relaxed state, and you can go on to swim even if the temperature's cold. Yeah. And it's natural. It's natural to.
Everything's Yep. Then the last thing that I found beneficial, and I tell athletes this a lot, is these people that you're swimming with, they're not your enemies. You're part of the same energy, and if you could approach them or look at them as like, we're all in this together. Like we're all part of the same amazing organism floating through the water. That is like, for me, it was an empowering, even though I was competing against them, it was empowering and it was comforting to know that we're all in this together. But when I went at it like, these people are trying to get in my way and they might beat me and they're the reason I got to overcome these others here. That was a very bad way to approach it mentally. But once I, flipped the switch and it was like, no, this is cool. We're all
you're
we're
not
all
alone.
Together. This is great. And that helped.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if nobody else in the field felt that way. As long as I felt that way, that was all good.
And that's just really bringing it back to you and your experience.
And that's really it. I mean, you can't control the other people. You can only control what's in here, and you can control it. So you just have to practice and do that.
And if adversity happens, you've practiced enough to know how to handle yourself. And even if you have to flip over for 10 seconds, your race is not blown. Right. You might just be looking at the sun that day. Yep.
All right, so hopefully some of this stuff helped you guys. I think this would be a great conversation piece, so start posting questions or comments. I would imagine that there isn't anybody who's going to watch this that has never had anxiety or never had some kind of an issue at the beginning of the swim or anytime. And everybody has figured out ways of overcoming that or are working to overcome that. So please share, ask questions, share your own experiences, but this
and what's worked for you.
And what's worked for you.
We may not have mentioned it.
Right. So hopefully you enjoyed this and found some useful information. Again, ask questions. We're here to help. And everything that we talked about was true. I did not make up my situation to role play. That was all legit. Every single thing I said was true to me. And when I race in a month and a half, I'm going to do the same stuff again. I'll probably have a little bit of anxiety. I'm going to have to work through it.
But now you have some new techniques.
There we go. Right. There you go.
It really does work.
All right. Ask questions. Be in touch.